there! Welcome to episode 27 of an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want and we try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. And with that said, let's get going. So of course we got to start off this episode at the crash site, and there was actually a lot to see. For one thing, a lot of the debris that you see as you're rising up to the surface remains in the water even after the cutscene is finished. And while various debris and purses and stuff like that are really cool to see still spinning around, one of the things that's really interesting is that the purse that you see in the in-game cutscene with the pendant and everything else can actually be triggered to do its animation every time you get near it, which of course makes it really hard to see the finer details of this particular purse. But if you look at it really quickly, you can actually see some textures of what looks like a diary in the back. And while it's really murky and hard to see what's going on underwater, one thing I did manage to come across, which is pretty much directly underneath the building itself, is a single immobile fish. Which is actually kind of funny because you don't see very many fish until you get inside of Rapture, so this guy's pretty lonely. And speaking of Rapture, how about that beautiful cutscene you see when you first submerge and see the city for the first time? I think many of us can agree that all of us really wanted to explore this particular area a little bit more, even though the game doesn't allow you to. Well, I think now would be a great time for that. So right now what you're looking at is how Rapture looks like before you even get inside the pod. And it's important to mention that because if you're inside the pod, the cutscene triggers certain sea animals to swim in at certain times, and it also shows off some of the welders working on the pipes and everything, but this is what it looks like before you trigger any of that. And it's kind of interesting to see that there's still some sea creatures that actually activate well before you ever get a chance to see them. And now we're looking at the centerpiece building, its windows and everything else, without certain effects kind of masking how it really looks. And you can see just how tall it actually is, and it gets so tall that I actually believe that it clips into the skybox of the game. But as interesting as this area is, what about those sequence triggers? Is there anything interesting there? Well, a lot of those sea creatures I was telling you about you can actually see up close in-game on your own time, just well after this cutscene. But the welder himself is something you don't get to see any other time in the game. Well, that's not exactly true either. He's the variant type of the Big Daddy. But what's really funny about him is that he's not holding a welding tool, because that would require the developers to actually render a welding tool, which they couldn't be bothered to do, so he's just holding nothing with sparks coming out the end. So about that plane you actually came from, where does it come from when it crashes into the hallway? Well, unfortunately, when you trigger the cutscene, you're forced to look forward so that you're not allowed to see where it comes from. So actually, if you look off into the distance, you can see right behind the marquee there's a little bit of a black outline, and that's the plane itself. But it's a lot more apparent when we actually boundary break over to that area and see that it's inside the building. Oddly enough, depending on where your character's positioned, the plane will disappear, but with enough finagling, you can actually see where the plane is positioned. So we're going to have the original scene in the lower left-hand corner so that you can see the comparison, because it's really interesting to see how much you can see outside of the window. Like, for example, if you take the camera through the door just after you trigger the cutscene, you can see Atlas warp into the scene and start running towards his destination. Now, you never really get a good quote-unquote look at Atlas at any time in the game. So it's interesting to get a nice little close-up of him, but not entirely convinced that this is supposed to be Atlas at all. You know, I could be wrong, but it kind of looks like a generic enemy to me. Now, not to be misinterpreted, I do believe that the game actually intends for that to be Atlas. I'm just saying that I think that they used a generic enemy model to portray Atlas. They actually did something very similar to this that I'll be showing you a little bit later into the episode. But yeah, in case you didn't get a great look at Atlas before, here he is again in some better lighting. And you can actually see that the hat is placed on top of the model's head, so you can see the hair underneath the hat. One of the things that Bioshock loves to do is to add a little bit of ambiguity to certain scenes. Like, for example, this one with Sandra. You can actually visit the projector room before you become a part of his show. But the developers were clever enough to keep you just out of view of him, and all you can see really is his silhouette cast against the wall. But if you take the camera through the door, you can actually see that it really is Sandra, and he's striking various poses. It's just something that's kind of neat because it could have been any character model at all, or no character model. It's really interesting. So we just defeated a Big Daddy and freed a little sister, and as you always know, little sisters like to go into hideaway holes. But the hot question has always been where they go, or how far down the hole do they go before whatever happens. And if you take a side view here, you can see that they crawl in the hole just enough so that once they get out of sight, blip, they're gone. Here's another example of developers reusing character models. Unfortunately for the character Tenenbaum, it wasn't just a aesthetic choice to keep her face hidden, it was also easier on the developers to do so, because if we do take the camera through the glass, which I actually can't do right now, the game actually tried to lock out my dev commands, but I was actually able to trick the game and I was able to go back later on, and at that point go through the glass. And unfortunately, Tenenbaum is not quite as good looking as she is in her profile picture. I'm sure a lot of you online daters can relate. Ugh, creepy little sister eyeballs. But no, what I'm actually here to look at is this book that she's reading. Or at least I think she's reading. Apparently she can read French, and that's what's going on in this book. The book actually has real, legible French text. Now, what does it say? Fortunately, I have a French-speaking fan that could take a look at it for me. And what he said was that more or less they're just rules and conditions of admission to some sort of religious brotherhood. It basically says to be faithful to the church, to say prayer every day, and do a communion. And what's actually kind of neat too is that he also said that the left and right pages are essentially the same, they just kind of rearranged the paragraphs, which I did a little bit of color coding for you so you can see where they've been rearranged. But you didn't come here to read books, we're here to boundary break, so let's move on. So we just put on the suit to disguise ourselves as a big daddy, and as you can see, the field of vision is a little different. When you gotta wonder to yourself, what does that look like in third person? Well, it's actually incredibly funny. What we're left with is 2 arms and a circle for a face. Easily the best looking superhero I've ever seen in my life. So the last clip we're going to look at is at the very end of the game, where a little sister gives you a tool to fight the last boss with. And what's really interesting about this one is I believe if you play this game at home you can see this for yourself, but after she gives you the tool, she crawls back into the hideaway hole and for some reason stays there. It's kind of creepy. I mean, they already look like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, so that's kind of creepy enough, but this is just too much. Hey, it's Pat's back! Well,
Pat back?
It's so weird to announce that since he's been here setting up the camera for like, I don't know, 15 minutes.
Listen, man, I'm rusty.
But at least now the audience knows that Pat's back.
Pat back.
Pat back. 2-week vacation. So, anyways, this week there's going to be no vote. It's going to be a very special episode.
No democracy.
No democracy this week. That's how you know it's a special episode. I was thinking to myself, do I want to do this for 10,000 subscribers? And I was like, nah, you know what? I'll do it for 9,700 something. That's the right number. So, anyways, that was Bioshock. If you like that video, check out some of my other videos in my playlist. I'm going to be working that into the outro, and there it is.
Right there. I can't see it.
Now it's hovering. I'm not even holding it up anymore.
Can you lift it?
No, it lifts itself, Pat. Alright, I'll see you guys later. Bye.
Doodles!